What does the Menorah teach us about our neshama? We're going to see two angles from Rashi and the Ramban's perspectives on what the Torah is telling us, specifically in Behaalosecha, where the instruction is to Aharon to light the Menorah, and yet we're reminded yet again that the Menorah had to be out of a single block of gold. Why is that relevant here? In the beginning of our parasha, Nochti Psukim, after the introductory Psukim that say Behaalosecha Saneros, that when Aharon has to light the Menorah or elevate the lamps of the Menorah, El Mul Penei Menorah Yo'iru Shiva Saneros, all of the lamps of the Menorah have to face the central lamp. And then the Torah continues to tell us that Aharon did as he was instructed. State in Pasuk, then the Pasuk says something which does not really seem to belong. This is the plan. This is how you make the Menorah. Miksha Zav has to be out of a single block of gold, including all the various details that are designed onto the Menorah. Mikshahi, all of that is out of a single, it's beaten out of a single piece of gold. Kamara, Shehera, Shemas Moshe, Kenos, Menorah, exactly like the vision that Moshe was shown. That's how Moshe made the Menorah. So Yaduvas Meforshim Fregen, the commentaries ask the question. The beginning of this parasha is the instruction to Aharon how to light the Menorah. And that includes the fact that all the lamps have to face into the central lamp. How to make a Menorah, we've already learned that long ago in Parashas Truma. So here you're telling Aharon how to light the Menorah. Why is this the time and the place to review how to build or how to construct the Menorah? Seeing as this is a question which surely strikes you at the simplest understanding of the Psukim, how come Rashi doesn't address it? It should be an obvious question to all at the Pshat level. Rashi doesn't say a word. Before we get to Rashi, let's have a look at the Ramban. The Ramban is Mevorah Setama Kosev Zed Ma'aseh Menorah. So the Ramban says, well, the reason why the Torah reviews over here the structure of the Menorah is so that you will know that throughout history, the Menorah always has to be out of a single block, hammered out of a single block. In other words, you might have thought that maybe it was only the Mishkan or maybe only the beginning, and if something breaks, you can solder it back on or something like that. Okay, that's the Ramban's opinion. It doesn't help for Rashi. The Pirush Rashi, from Rashi's perspective, it still doesn't make sense. This principle, let's assume that the Ramban is correct, that the Torah is teaching us that for the whole of history, anytime there's a Menorah, it has to be made out of a single block of gold. That also doesn't belong in this parasha. Now, in the Friedrich Parashas, you should have mentioned that earlier on when you first spoke about the Menorah, in Parashas Truma or in Parashas Emor. Either Truma, where we were told how to build the Menorah, or Emor, which we'll see later, talks about the process of lighting the Menorah. So the Ramban's solution doesn't necessarily answer for Rashi. Let's try the Or HaChaim's approach. The Or HaChaim is Masber. The Or HaChaim explains as the Posukum Pavor Natos in Pirush HaKsuvim. The Or HaChaim says you might have misunderstood how the Menorah works based on the Psukim over here, because you might have thought because the direct translation is that you should lift up the lamps of the Menorah. So the Or HaChaim learns that what that means is that the actual lamps themselves are not part of the Menorah. They are filled with oil and then lifted onto the Menorah. So you used to take them down, clean them up, refill with oil, and put them back onto the Menorah according to the Or HaChaim. So you might have thought that there are other parts of the Menorah that are also portable or detachable, like the lamps. In other words, as nach der Menorah is gemacht geworden is nitoken chiyuv, as is also in Miksha. That maybe after the Menorah was originally hewn out of a single block of gold, after that you could actually turn it into detachable, reassembling Menorah. On das Miksha is not bitchila. The fact that it tells us you hammer it out of a piece of gold, that's right at the beginning when you make the Menorah in the first place. The Or HaChaim uses the words. After that you can do as you please. That's what you would have misunderstood. Therefore, is the pasuk Moshe said, "My Menorah Miksha v'Gomer." Therefore, the Torah has to say, no, the lamps might be detachable, but the Menorah fundamentally has to still be out of a single block of gold, as it in Miksha is oich shpeter, and that requirement lasts throughout. That's Or HaChaim's explanation. Still doesn't work for Rashi. That's not going to help us explain why Rashi did not address the issue why Miksha is repeated here or Ma'aseh Menorah is repeated over here, because Varum. Let's assume that that Rashi takes the same view as the Or HaChaim, that the actual lamps that sit at the top of the Menorah are detachable. And there's a logic to say that every time you took the lamps off, cleaned them out, filled them with oil, and put them back on top of the menorah, it's two issues. Number one, it's really difficult to try and explain that the simplest meaning of the pasuk is because the lamps are detachable. And every single day they were replaced back onto the menorah after being cleaned and refilled. What's the logic to say, but the rest of the menorah, we're going to make it detachable when originally it was all whole? Because the Torah was really clear in Parashas Truma that the entire menorah has to be miksha, a single block of gold. And now you could say neros are not part of the original menorah, so therefore they were separate. Where's the logic that, according to Pshat, you'd start imagining you could now break the menorah apart? But besides that, is in the Pirush HaKoseh Behaalosecha, have a look at how Rashi interprets the words Behaalosecha, to light the lamps. Rashi explains Behaalosecha does not mean like the Orach Chaim, that you're taking lamps and placing them on top of the menorah. Rather, it means Hashem Sha'alav Oile. It's because you're causing the flame to go up. Therefore, therefore, the Torah uses an expression of lifting up when it's actually talking about igniting, not placing lamps on top of the menorah, to teach us that you have only fulfilled your mitzvah once the lamp is burning independently of your assistance. So there you have it clearly. Rashi obviously does not agree with the Orach Chaim that they used to physically pick up the lamps and put them on top of the menorah every single day. The pasuk read kipshute vegen lahav. Because where would Rashi have extrapolated that out of? Once he's told us clearly, Behaalosecha is referring to the flame itself. Sha'alav oile. It doesn't say a word about the lamps that those flames are in. So where would Rashi have gotten it from that you put the lamps on top of the menorah? The Or HaChaim's answer does not help us for Rashi. Bleibt Yeshayda, which means we're back at square one without question. The pasuk of Zemaisa go mixture. Why is the Torah here at the point where it's describing how to light the menorah, repeating how you make a menorah, and Rashi does not address it? In addition to which, we also have to understand what's the Torah telling us over here? That when you light the menorah, you have to light all 7 of the lamps facing towards the center. That's we were already told that in Parashas Truma in the design of the menorah, where it says, you make 7 branches or 7 lamps. And when you put the lamps on, they have to illuminate towards the center. So we already know this information that all 6 lamps from either side have to come towards the central lamp. Why is the Torah repeating it over here? Nochmer, next question. If the design of the menorah is that the lamps are all facing towards the central lamp, Rashi already told us in Parashas Truma that when it says that they should illuminate towards the center of the menorah, it means design the openings where the wicks are going to come out, that are going to actually be where the flame is, design them facing the middle part of the menorah, because that way, when you light the menorah, everything's going to be facing as it should towards the middle of the menorah. And naturally, the orientation of the lamps is towards the middle lamp. So if that's already the design of the menorah, how do you now give an instruction, make sure that it happens when you light the menorah? If the menorah is designed in such a way that automatically, because of the design of the menorah, that's how it's going to be. The design of the menorah is such that when you light the lamps, they are going to all burn with an orientation towards the middle. Why do you now have to instruct me? When you light the menorah, light them such a way that they oriented towards the middle. It's quite likely that if you examine Rashi properly, you'll see that Rashi has addressed this issue. Because as Mefarish, he explains, when it says illuminate the 7 lamps, it says the 6 lamps that are on the 3 on either side, the 6 lamps that come out at angles from the central lamp, those 3 from the east side are all oriented towards the middle column. That means that the wicks are oriented towards the middle, and likewise the three to the west, the tips of the wicks are oriented towards the middle one. In other words, the fact that Rashi uses unusual language over here, speaking about the wicks or the tips of the wicks. Here in Behaalosecha he's talking about the wicks and the tips of the wicks, as opposed to Parshas Truma, where he's speaking about the actual lips of the lamp, where the wick is going to lie. So that would maybe Rashi is addressing the issue. There is a unique instruction over here to Aharon, which is besides the fact that the design of the menorah is that the lips holding, or the mouths holding those wicks are going to face towards the middle of the menorah anyway. Aharon actually has to almost like bend the wicks to ensure that they're facing the right direction. So that they should all face towards the middle lamp. And that's going to make a difference to what it looks like when it's actually burning, that it's going to be burning, so to speak, facing that middle branch. Okay, there's only one problem. If you're telling me that's an instruction to Aharon, the words in the pasuk do not sound like an instruction. If that is the case, that Aharon is being instructed over here, angle the wicks in a particular way, why is that not in the words of the pasuk? The words of the pasuk are El Mul Pnei HaMenorah Ya'iru, passive voice, Shivas HaNeros. The 7 lamps should burn towards the middle lamp, not you should ignite them towards the middle lamp. If it's true that now there's a unique instruction given to Aharon, make sure that you angle the wicks in such a way that it illuminates towards the middle, then the pasuk should have used language that implies instruction, like ta'ir shivas haneros. Make sure that the 7 lamps illuminate in this particular way. Not in the passive voice that they will be lit. Will be lit does not sound like an instruction. So we have a number of questions over here. Mainly, why is the Torah including the instructions about how to make a menorah here, where already you're talking about how to light the menorah? Why are we repeating the idea that they all have to face into the central piece? Why do we have to be reminded that it's out of a single block of gold? Is there bi'ur bozem? Well, to get to that, we have to identify that there is a running debate between Rashi and the Ramban about the various places where it tells us about the menorah. What is the purpose of each of those places? In the Parshas Vosretzach, and there are 3 places. In the Parshas Vosretzach, wegen der Menorah, finden wir eine Machlokas zwischen Rashi und Ramban. So with regards to the 3 different places that speak about the menorah, Rashi and the Ramban have totally different explanations of how and why the Torah presents this information. First place, Aleph, in Parshas Emor. This is not necessarily in chronological order. Parshas Emor we have a state that Siva v'ikchay Hashem zayzoch kos l'amor. Parshas Emor tells us that you have to take pure olive oil that's been crushed in order to illuminate the menorah. Lahales ner tamid, on a consistent basis. Where michutz pareiches ha'idus, outside of the pareiches, in other words, in the area called the kodesh, ba'oil moed, in the oil moed, which is of course the equivalent of the heichal in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Yarachos to Aharon Gomer, and Aharon is the one who has to organize it all. Zok Rashi. So Rashi says, what's happening in Parshas Emor? So Parshas Mitzvahs Haneros. This is the parasha that gives us the instruction of how the lamps of the menorah work. And then at that time he tells us, Parshas V'ata Tetzaveh, the Parasha V'ata Tetzaveh, which came already before, which also said, Shemen Zayzoch. That was not an instruction to light the menorah. That was part of the detail of the parashas that describe the construction of the Mishkan, starting from Truma through Tetzaveh and beyond. And this is where the Torah is telling us what the purpose of the menorah is, that it is a place that will have lamps that will illuminate. Only in Parashas Emor are we told to illuminate. That's Rashi's view. Tetzaveh is part of telling us what the parts are of the Mishkan. Emor is the instruction, light a menorah. Now the Ramban dot in Parshas Emor is Chelek Rashi. The Ramban has a totally different perspective than Parshas Emor, unlent. Tzorech HaParshas Hazo is Parshas Emor. He says, what's the purpose of this Parasha Emor if we've already been told in Parshas Tetzaveh that you're supposed to have Shemen Zayzoch and use it for the menorah? The Gabei Adlokas HaMenorah is, what's the Chiddush with regards to the menorah? The implication of Pashat Tetzaveh is we're told that Aaron and his son should arrange the menorah. The implication over there is that it's all about the lamps, that you always have to have lamps in the Mishkan. If there's a menorah, they go on the menorah. If there's not a menorah, perhaps you could have them independently. If Chas v'Shalom the menorah is broken or lost. So at the end of Pashat Tetzaveh, you don't yet know that those 7 lamps have to be on the menorah. Therefore, Therefore, here in Pashas Emor, it said, those 7 lamps, you know where they belong, on top of the pure menorah. That you light those lamps nowhere else except the menorah. In other words, the Rabban is saying this is part of the instruction of how to light, just more specific details. Das heißt, like Rashi's Parshas Emor did Tzivui from the Parshas Mitzvahs Haneros. According to Rashi, Emor is the first time we're instructed to light the menorah. Tetzaveh was just describing the purpose, the role the menorah will play in the Mishkan. Whereas the Ramban says, no, we were instructed to light 7 lamps already in Tetzaveh, and now we're tweaking that in Parshas Emor and saying, and those 7 lamps belong on the menorah. As it does on Dafkala menorah. So that's your first distinction between Rashi and the Ramban. Rashi is saying there is no instruction to light a menorah in Tetzaveh. The instruction appears only in Emor. According to the Ramban, the instruction began in Parshas Tetzaveh without telling us that the lamps belong on the menorah. That's only clarified in Parshas Emor. Second distinction, base. Betchilas Parshas Seinu, in the beginning of our parasha, is Rashi Meforish. Rashi says, why is Behaalosecha here straight after the end of last week's parasha, which was about the Chanukah Samizbeach, with the gifts of the Nesim, the Karbonos that they brought? So it says, Lo, Monismech, Parashas HaMenorah, the Parashas HaNesim. Why is the story, the instruction about the Menorah straight after the instruction about the Nesim, bringing their inaugural Karbonos? Because Aaron HaKohen saw all the other Nesim are bringing these karbonos and felt, I'm left out, I'm not participating in the inauguration of the Mishkan. Told him, don't worry, your contribution, not just, as we'll see a little bit later in the Sikha, not just to the future of the Mishkan, but here to the inauguration of the Mishkan is that you get to prepare and light the menorah. And that's greater than what the Nesim did, that you prepare and light the menorah. That's what Rashi says. In other words, Rashi is saying Behaalosecha is directly linked to and a follow-on from the story of Chanukah Samizbeach. The Ramban fragt Rashi and lent anders. The Ramban disagrees. Now that we already know the approach that the Ramban is taking, which is there was an instruction about lighting lamps in Parshas Tetzaveh, and then further detail was provided in Parshas Emor that you light the lamps on the menorah. So in Behaalosecha we're going to get further detail to that original instruction. As that lokamusan ala menorah dafka, right? In Parshas Tetzaveh we learned that that you light a menorah. Then we learned afterwards in Emor that it has to be on a menorah. So the Ramban's perspective is, we're now at the point where we have discussed the fact that we have completed not only constructing the Mishkan, but also setting up the Mishkan. So now the Torah is also wrapping up all the other details of what we were originally told in Parshas Tetzaveh. In other words, further information about how to light the menorah. V'tziva, and the further information is that he instructed Shivas Haneros Kulon Dolkus the Doris al Mul Pnei HaMenorah, that throughout history, here's the additional piece of information: the menorah lamps always have to be oriented towards the middle column. So, what have we learned between all of the parashas? When you light the lamps, it cannot be without a menorah. That's what we learned in Parshas Emor. And it cannot be without a menorah where all the wicks face, or all the lamps face the middle pole. That we learned from Parshas Behaalosecha. And that's for all of history. And that's why the Ramban says over here, you'll notice it does not emphasize because this is going to be the same halacha, that the menorah always has to be oriented towards the middle lamp, even in the time of the future in the Beis HaMikdash. So what we're seeing over here is a major distinction between Rashi and the Ramban, understanding the entire flow of how the story of the menorah was presented. The chilek zwischen Rashi and Ramban. So here's the distinction. Laut Rashi, seine Frauen drei besondere Parashas benegeht zu der Menorah. Rashi is coming from the perspective Tetzaveh, Emor, and Behaalosecha are 3 independent parashas instructing about the Menorah. Der Tzivi Bereish Pashas Tetzaveh is a tell from the Tzivi V'Seidim Melech Samishkan from Pashas Truma. Pashas Tetzaveh, that was part of the story of Pashas Truma, which is how you make a Mishkan and what needs to be in a Mishkan and what's role it's going to play. Menorah's role? To illuminate. Pashas Emor is Pashas Mitzvahs Hanerois. Pashas Emor told us the details of lighting the lamps on the menorah. Shemen Zayzoch, Al Menorah Tahira, etc. On Pashas Behaalosecha, Pashas Behaalosecha Hanerois is Pashas HaMenorah. Surprisingly, Rashi takes it that our Pasha, despite the fact that it says Behaalosecha, which sounds like it's all about Aharon lighting the menorah, Rashi says it's actually there also telling us about the menorah itself. This is the Pasha that tells us, Nit Pashas HaNeiros v'im Pashas Emor, not the laws of the lamps, because we already dealt with that in Pashas Emor, the laws of the menorah itself, and we'll detail that shortly. Ramban, whereas the Ramban says, no, everything is talking about the Neiros. In Pashas Tetzaveh Pasha is Pashas Tetzaveh Pasha from the mitzvah Sadlokas Haneros. According to the Ramban, Pashas Tetzaveh, the first time we're given an instruction to light lamps. And then Pashas Emor and our Pashas Behaalosecha zayin beide protim v'ashlomis in dine adlokas haneros. They fill in other details to complete the picture of what the laws around lighting those lamps are. Has to be on a menorah, has to all face the middle. Has to have zayin menorah dafka v'she'iru el ever poneo. So now that we understand that there's this very big distinction between how Rashi and the Ramban are looking at all the parashas and the one, of course, that's relevant to us, Behaalosecha, Apianal kommt a Chilek zwischen Rashi und Ramban, euch wenn again and Pasuk, v'zemais hamner miksha gomer. So the Rashi and the Ramban are going to have very different perspectives on what that Pasuk is all about when it says, and this is how you make the menorah, and it has to be miksha, made out of a single block of gold, and why this belongs over here. Ladasa Ramban, if you go with the Ramban's view, which is Behaalosecha parasha, where the whole purpose of this parasha, light the menorah in such a way that all of the lamps face the middle, is a hemshech ledinei haneros. The shita of the Ramban is this is part and parcel, a continuation of the laws of the lamps that you light. Hadlokas menorah, or as we call it, lighting the menorah. The pasuk, well, if the whole theme is how to light the candles, how to light the lamps of the menorah, then the fact that the Torah over here also talks about the design of the menorah, miksha, is part of how to light the menorah. In other words, it's telling us that the design of the menorah is relevant to fulfilling the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. How so? As the Ramban already pointed out, from Pashas Tetzaveh, I did not yet know that the lamps have to be on a menorah. Emor clarified that. In order to fulfill the mitzvah, the lamps have to be on a menorah. Now in Behaalosecha we're told, was is miksha, not just any menorah. It has to be the kind of menorah that was made out of a single block of gold. If you don't have that kind of menorah, if the menorah was welded together, screwed together, clipped together, you do not fulfill the mitzvah of Neiros, because the Ramban is saying it's all detail about how you fulfill the mitzvah of lighting a menorah. Whereas, like Pirush Rashi, Rashi is coming from a completely different perspective. Rashi calls Behaalosecha the parasha of the menorah, not the parasha of the lamps on the menorah. Rashi is saying we are not at this point focused primarily on lighting the menorah, even though we also discuss lighting the menorah. We're primarily focused on the menorah. Specifically the fact that the Torah here says that this menorah has to be made out of a single block of gold. So we need to understand this. Surely at face value it does not seem like this is a parasha speaking about how to design and make a menorah. Surely at face value this is the parasha that's telling us how to light a menorah. Behaalosecha es haneros. Right? That and that it's going to be done in such a way that the lamps will face the middle. Therefore, it must be that if Rashi insists that this is called Parashas HaMenorah, then from his perspective, even the detail about how the lamps of the menorah have to be oriented to face the middle lamp, that's not so much as to fulfill the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. Like the Ramban says, not to that's a gufa menorah, it's saying if you don't have this way of lighting the menorah, where all of the flames are oriented towards the middle, your menorah, the object of the menorah, not the mitzvah of lighting, the object of the menorah will be lacking. What does that mean? Let's explain. The Psukim of Parshas Truma. Go back to Parshas Truma, where we are first introduced to the Menorah. But Svekeret v'gemaisa Menorah. State that says this: Vasisa Menorah zav tahor. You have to make a Menorah out of pure gold. Mikshate asa Menorah. The Menorah has to be beaten out of a single piece of gold, and that includes Yireicha, V'kona, Gvia, Kaftera, Farcham, Imenu, Yiyu, all of the design elements that are part of the Menorah. Denach state in Pasuk. Then the Pasuk says, V'shisha kolim yotzim mitzideha. There are 6 branches that come out of the sides of the Menorah. You've just told me there's a Menorah with Yireicha, Pircha, and all these different design elements. And now you're telling me there's 6 branches that come out of the Menorah. 3 on the one side, and 3 on the other side. Kumtois. What's implied over here in this message is that besides, and in spite of the fact that the whole menorah is a single block of gold, the pasuk is immediately identifying a difference between the central element of the menorah, which is called Gufasha menorah. That's like the core of the menorah. That's like the essence of the menorah. Compared to the branches that come out, which says yoitzim, they come out. They're not part of the core menorah. In Gufasha menorah haben sich nicht angesehen kein besonder Chalokim. When you look at the main piece of the menorah, the base, the central column of the menorah, you don't see anything that seems to be in any way separate from the original block of gold that was now shaped into this form. So hat sich klar gesehen ein Kli. You looked at it, it's one element. Whereas the 6 branches, despite the fact that they originate from the same block of gold, when you walk past from a distance and you see the finished product of the menorah, you can't immediately tell that those side branches are part of the original menorah. So that means you might misunderstand who says this menorah was made out of a single block. We need a methodology to be able to illustrate at all times that the menorah is from one original piece of gold. Therefore, when Aaron fulfills his obligation, when Aaron lights the menorah in such a way that all of the lamps of the menorah orient towards that central beam, which clearly is from the original menorah, the minute I, even from a distance, see that all of the lamps are facing the middle lamp, not only can I now tell that the whole menorah is a single keli, because it's all oriented towards one goal, but I could see that every part of the menorah belongs to, not only belongs to, is an accessory to, is an appendix to the main part of the menorah. Telling me, that even though here, of course, that Eibishter is instructing Aaron how you light the menorah. Make sure you do it in this way. Make sure the lamps face this way. Die Pula von Aaron in die Psilis, nicht die Pula verbunden mit Asiyas Menorah. We're not talking over here about actually building the menorah. The Maise in Piri HaNeiros, even how to design the lips of where the wicks are going to. We're not discussing that now. Is aber teuch gnoi begidroi negea euch zu der menorah gufa, but the way in which the menorah is being lit is relevant not only to fulfilling his obligation to light the menorah correctly, but this is relevant to ensuring that the menorah is still now, after it's been made very clearly, a singular entity made from a single block of gold. With that information, we can understand on the far steht nicht im Pasuk der Lashon To'ir Shivas HaNeiros. We can now understand why the Pasuk did not say, you, Aaron, light the 7 candles in this way. Because that would imply that it's an instruction, and then it would mean it's all about the laws of lighting a menorah, which it's not according to Rashi. No, Ya'iru Shivas HaNeiros, it's in the passive voice. The lamps should illuminate in this way. They should symbolize the unity of the menorah. Because the Torah wants us to know that this is not just about the human responsibility that Aaron has to light the menorah correctly, nor lost the place over there, nor adin in the chefza shel menorah, but rather it is a halacha about the object of the menorah. In order for it to be the correct version of the menorah, that it's a single block, you have to be able to see it while it is lit, that it's all oriented to that central column out of which everything else was designed. Aber Arois bringen Dominion wie Al-Mupnei Am-Ner is a chilik from Parshas Ha-Menorah, need von Parshas Mitzvahs and Neros. Therefore, Rashi is telling us, look, the Torah wants us to know that this section of Torah is about the Menorah, not just about lighting candles. It's the Pasuk Moisef Do. That's why the Torah here says, V'zeh Maaseh HaMenorah. This is the story of how you make the Menorah. Miksha Zav, out of a single piece of gold. Adirei Chad Pircha Miksha, essentially from top to toe, basically the bottom base of the menorah all the way to the flowers that are the design of the menorah. Or noch mehr, and look at the language the Torah uses. The pasuk rechnet da nitos was unter die menorah, gufa shel menorah, mit ikonim, gevim, kafterim, uprochim, vi in Parshas Truma. Here the Torah does not go into all the design details of the menorah like it did in Parshas Truma, because if we were instructed about how to make a menorah, you'd have to have that information. Now, in klodus diken lashon menorah at pircha, rather it's a much more generic expression, the menorah from top to toe. Why? Because the message over here is about the oneness of the menorah made from a single block. Ve'yar shloimeh, you can even see this in Rashi's language. As das is the dir kaloshen in Pirish Rashi, that's how Rashi says, Gufa shel menorah kula ve'chol atolo yibo. That it's the menorah, the whole menorah, and everything that is an accessory to the menorah. Emphasis being on whole menorah, on oneness, on original block. Because the Torah over here is not just telling us physically, this is the way to shape a menorah. Take a single block of gold and hammer it into shape. Rather, the emphasis over here is that every piece and detail and shape of the menorah is a part of Gufa Shel Menorah, is a part of that Gufa Shel Menorah, the essence, the core, the central beam of the menorah. That's Rashi's big chidush over here, different to the Ramban who says, no, we're just going through instructions about how to light a menorah. Now, you might ask, remember how Rashi contextualized this? Rashi right at the beginning of the parasha pointed out as that Aharon Aharon was feeling a little bit bad about himself. Not him, not anybody from Shevet Levi was included in Chanukas HaMizbech, and he felt, wow, that maybe the Eibush is upset at me because of Egel Azov or something like that. Therefore, what did Eibush comfort him? Shato madlik or meitiv v'saneros. Don't worry, you're going to light and clean or prepare the menorah. Hey, sister. This was Rashi's words, implying as the parasha read bikavegam madlik or meitiv v'saneros. That seems to imply that this whole parasha is about lighting the menorah. Sounds like Rashi's contradicting himself. Rashi's drawing our attention to the fact that this is parasha's ha-menorah. It's all about showing the oneness of the menorah. But Rashi himself told us it's all about telling Aaron, you light the menorah. So wie stimmt es? Mit Hanal, als der Teuchen HaParsha ist nicht die Etzem Meisa Adlok V'Atova Shel HaNeros. How does Rashi reconcile the fact that this is comfort for Aaron, that you're going to light the menorah, which is greater than the Chanukas HaMizbeach? How does that reconcile with what Rashi just told us, that this is Parshas HaMenorah? Was negets in Guf HaMenorah? How is it relevant to the core of the menorah, to the structure of the menorah, the design of the menorah, the fact that Aaron is being comforted for what he perceived to be exclusion from Chanukas HaMizbeach? The bi'ur internal explanation is this. Shengret Hamol Baruch, there's a Sich and Chelek Yudches where the Rebbe goes through this as Dibur Hashem, this assurance of the Eibush. By your life, I promise you that what you're contributing is greater than what they contributed. Because you will light and prepare the menorah is made not the adlakas haneros from Aaron keshele atzmo. The Rebbe explains it's not just the fact that physically Aaron is the one lighting the menorah, and the fact that he's lighting the menorah is in some way greater than what the Nesim had done. Nor, rather, the message is Aaron saying, I was left out of the inauguration. They were part of Chanukas HaMizbech. They inaugurated the Mizbech, and I did nothing. So therefore, the Eibush is not going to say, don't worry, in the future, going from this day forward, you will light the menorah. No, you're doing Chanukas HaMenorah. You're going to contribute to the inauguration of the menorah like they contributed to the inauguration of the Mizbech, and yours is greater. Why? In Dalet 12 Teg, was the Nesim haben gebracht their karbonos to Chanukas HaMizbeach through the 12 days that the Nesim, on behalf of their tribes, were bringing karbonos to initiate the Mizbeach. Dalet 12 Teg, Aaron madik umeitev saneros. During that time, Aaron is preparing and lighting the menorah, and therefore was das aged of Chanukas HaMenorah. Therefore, he is also involved now in a process of inauguration, not inauguration of the Mizbech, inauguration of the Menorah, which is even greater. And he has certain major advantages in what he's doing over what they did. For example, they didn't bring the korbanos; they brought the korbanos for the kohanim to bring on their behalf. Aaron is lighting the Menorah himself. The Mizbech is outside. Aaron is inside the kodesh. He's in a very holy environment that's off limits to the Nasim. So, in many respects, his inauguration contribution to the Mishkan is greater than this. And as we've pointed out, what Aaron is achieving is not just in terms of his personal contribution or his personal following of a mitzvah of Hashem, that they personally were bringing korbanos and he personally is lighting the menorah. But as we've just pointed out, Rashi tells us the way in which he lights the menorah completes making the menorah what it should be. And once you make the menorah what it should be, an entity made out of one block of pure gold, then it can be used going forward indefinitely. Now this all has a powerful spiritual lesson. Let's understand it. The neshama v'atom and ner, we know very well that the neshama is compared to a candle. Like Shlomo HaMelech tells us, that the Eibishter's candle is the human soul. As klolos neshamas yisol v'et ungerufen menorah, and as the Alter Rebbe points out in the Kutei Torah, take all, and it's based on the Haftarah of Parashat Behaalosecha, the Yidden collectively are like a menorah. Was in the menorah seinen da shiva neiros, the menorah had 7 branches, welche seinen die 7 madrigas and avodas Hashem, which represent 7 different realities or realms of how we serve the Eibishter. And it is in dem Franz Feinyanim, so there's 2 components to this. On the one hand, you have the neshamas as they are at their point of origin, at their source. As the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya, that at our source, every single neshama is completely aligned and we share a single Father, the Eibishter. All neshamas are incorporated in a single entity and completely unified. At our core, every single Jew is one thing. One thing. But then every neshama branches out from that original core. That makes each one of us into an individual. And each individual unique and separate from the next individual. Every one of us has our unique talents and resources. And everyone is created to serve the Eibishter using our unique character, personality, talents. And those 2 components, this absolute unity at our core, and yet our individuality, once we manifest as people, that's reflected in the menorah. First thing you have to know about the menorah is every single detail is made out of a single block of gold. That part of the menorah, that element of the menorah, represents how Jews are at our source. We're all a single block of pure gold. We have absolute unity without any division or separation. And then from there we branch out into 7 major streams, 7 majorly different approaches to how to serve the Eibishter. Everybody is unique. And also the Pasuk, so the Pasuk tells us when you become unique, don't lose sense of who you are at your core. When you rise and illuminate as the lamp that you are, what should it look like when each of us is serving Hashem in our unique way, aligned with our unique character, talents, and opportunities? It has to be with an orientation back to the center point. It has to be obvious to whoever is observing us that the fact that I'm serving the Eibishter in my unique way is not separate. It's not independent. It's linked with the overall mission of the whole Jewish people, and it's linked back to the core that we all share. Which means the core of all of it is, yes, I might be doing this and you might be doing that, but you know what we're all doing? We're all here to serve the Eibishter, and that has to be clear. This is not my agenda, it's not my personal aspiration, it's to serve the Eibishter. The Ramban and Rashi illustrate us 2 different ways that could play out, or 2 different areas of emphasis in this balance between individuality and the shared source. And dem Gufas eine Franz zwei Eufanim. So the two things. You have the Ramban saying, listen, the whole point is you have to have this kind of menorah in order to light the menorah. So the design of the menorah, the fact that it's from a single block, is relevant to what? To how the menorah is lit. Or the fakert, or you have the other opinion, which is Rashi, as the fact that all of the lamps orient towards the middle, that makes the menorah a true menorah. That's Rashi, which is Rashi's opinion. In the Pula von Aharon, so Aharon, who's the person who has this profound impact on the Jewish people to elevate the lamps of their souls, is Davasis Lefi Pshuta, Un Vidasis Lefi Pnimiusa Matarosa. You can read Aaron's engagement with the Jewish people at the pshat simplistic level, which obviously we'll find in Rashi's interpretation, or you could find a deeper message which includes the goal and purpose of all of it, which you'll find in the Ramban's interpretation. Rashi Basinyon is Pshutish or Mikra. Rashi, whose goal is to explain the simplest understanding of the Psukim, is Mefarish Pulas Aharon from Behaalosecha Saneres Kipshuta. He explains very simply, what does it mean to light the menorah? As a poet by Neshama Yisrael, Azed B'Finatzma Zozayin B'Aliyah. What does it mean? Aaron's job is get every Jew to shine in their personal, unique way. And to shine means to elevate them so that they aspire to reconnect to their source. So that's what Aaron's life and avodah is all about. He is the chaperone of the queen, referring to the Jewish people. In other words, he's the one who brings the queen to the king. He brings the Jewish people towards Hashem. His job is to cultivate our neshamas to the extent that we rise up and reconnect to our source. And when we connect with our source, we are all absolutely one. In other words, kumtois. As the Behaalosecha is teichna dialog zu b'chinas miksha. So the pshat is, you get somebody to shine, you get somebody to perform what the neshama is here for, it should link them back to that sense of absolute oneness. Therefore, Rashi says if there's a conversation about Aharon Behaalosecha Saneres, the goal is actually the menorah itself. Get people to reconnect to that source, to that sense of oneness. Get the individual lamps to all orient towards the middle, so that they can all be part of Miksha Achas, a single menorah. In other words, the fact that the menorah is a single block of gold, and the fact that all of the lamps of the menorah are el mul pnei menorah, oriented towards the middle, is a Chelek von Miksha, das is Masham Dachtus von Miksha Shebamaisa Menorah. That gets us to where we need to be. That gets us to a point of oneness. Our avodah brings us together. The Ramban aber, was ein Pirish is nicht nur Pshotim, no ich dvarim neimim liyodechein. The Ramban, who says clearly that while he is from the Pashtani Amikra, still he wants to bring those things that are very pleasing and beautiful to understand if you appreciate more spiritual things. Soida Satira, so he shares also more mystical things. He comes from a slightly different perspective. It's not just about the fact that we want to reconnect everybody to their source, but there's a purpose. The purpose is that the reason we want to elevate neshamas is because the Eibishter's ultimate goal is that the world becomes infused with absolute godliness, that it becomes a home for Hashem. That you should live in a world which is a place of conflict, which is a place of disparity, disconnect from Hashem, and there you should bring the ultimate revelation of God. Therefore, the Ramban is coming from the opposite angle. Why is there unity? Why is there connection to our core? That incredible unity that can be achieved once we are in touch with the essence of our neshama is it's not good enough to keep that unique achdus to the highest level of the core of your neshama. It has to be felt and experienced in the 7 streams of differentiated service of Hashem. That we shouldn't only feel that tremendous achdus when we are in some elevated, pristine place, we should feel it every single day, going about our individual business. That's why he says that the 7 lamps have to be facing the middle menorah, so that it is clear what we're achieving over here. We're not only feeling one, we're not only experiencing our neshama, we're streaming it out into the reality of the world. That's why the Ramban says the key over here is not the menorah itself, but what you illuminate with the menorah. But if you want to light the menorah appropriately, Ist das durch dem, was in der Adloch ist, nicht die Achtus von Mikshur, Shemitzadetz Manashama. You have to know where you're coming from. This is not a personal agenda. It's not a personal aspiration. It's all about expressing this absolute oneness and connection to Hashem, which we then bring out through our avodah. So Rashi is saying that the menorah illustrates how we discover our core and our unity, and the Ramban is saying, and then we take it and plug it into the world so we can elevate the world and turn it into a dir b'tachtonim. All of that illustrated in how you light a menorah.